Gosh, this was supposed to be presented last spring with a number of undergraduate students I was working with, and the nature of this changed because we did more research over the summer, and now I'm not really working with any undergraduates right now because my teaching load is heavier, but I have Mollie Passacantando here, who's been a really wonderful part of the team, and she's going to present later on some of the work that they've produced. But we thought that, introducing the idea of how we've been trying to involve students in our climate action plan development and kind of an energy transition at Rutgers would be good. And like I said, I first envisioned this with kind of teams of students presenting what they've been doing, but they have moved on and gone other places at this point with the rescheduling. So Mollie and I will kind of talk about this program and what we've been trying to do. And then we're really hoping to, answer any questions you all have, and then maybe get some advice from those of you who've been doing this kind of work. So for just a little historical context, in the fall of 2019, which feels like another world ago, students and faculty and various community members marched in the climate strike. And students have been organizing, and we had kind of unprecedented participation in this. And at that point, right before students marched, actually, President Barchi at Rutgers announced he would support the students' demand for Rutgers to reach zero carbon by the 2030 date they have been requesting. And this was, I think, a surprise to the students and many of the faculty who'd been, pushing for this from the inside. We knew that, we were a Big Ten university that was behind in as far as climate change action goes. And many people had been working, for a long time to try to get more sustainability efforts and more climate action going. I knew of the stuff at Rutgers, New Brunswick, but, across Rutgers University at all its campuses, really, there had been efforts. So the president, after that point, formed a task force on carbon neutrality and climate resilience, meaning that it was meant to both address mitigating Rutgers greenhouse gas emissions and what we put into the atmosphere, but also prepare us to deal with climate change. Rutgers has some properties, probably at Tuckerton that are vulnerable to sea level rise, not to mention, many of us were at Rutgers when Sandy hit and other storms like that. And so there's a focus on both mitigation and adaptation. Dr. Bob Kopp, who's a climate scientist who does sea level rise, and Dr. Kevin Lyons, who many of you probably know, who's in the business school and does supply chain management and sustainability, were named as the chairs of this task force. And this task force in February released a pre-planning report and then an interim report after forming teams to address various things. Like there's energy and buildings, which I'm co-chair of that working group. And there's a food working group. There's a land use group and so on. So the Climate Task Force has a website and you can find all this on there. At the same time, I am associate director at the Rutgers Energy Institute. And one of the things I had been talking about in Kevin Lyons, who's also an associate director, Dunbar Burney, who's the associate director, and Frank Felder, who was the director, we're discussing this idea of using Rutgers as a living lab for students to be able to study and research sustainable energy and production, production and consumption transitions, right? So how to get Rutgers toward, moving towards more sustainably using its energy, how to, understand shifting what the source of our energy. And myself personally, I work a lot on kind of getting people like kind of behavioral approaches to conserving energy. So, I had lots of ideas about how students, could be part of research that looks at behavioral nudges on campus and things like that. And so we've been talking about this. And when the Climate Action Task Force came, we had the opportunity, and then we had COVID, right? And so we kind of, at that point, took this opportunity. I had been working with undergraduates on various Rutgers energy kind of conservation or production focused projects for a long time. But we took this opportunity to really think about how we might engage undergraduates more, particularly with their interest in seeing Rutgers make a climate change commitment and, developing the climate action plan. And so Mollie was really great because she was a student I had worked with individually, but also is very tied into many student groups. And so continually advocated for trying to, involve students in the writing of this climate action plan and various research tasks. So we're going to talk about 3 pieces of this process. The first one being kind of the problem and how we decided to try to address it. The second one being how we coordinated students. And then the third being kind of we had a strong focus on helping students and, using part of the research to kind of, or the program to communicate results. And this was kind of a pilot, and it was a little flying by the seat of our pants as we put it together fairly last minute. So as as COVID kind of threw everything into disarray, we thought, oh, there's a lot of students who, were supposed to have internships this summer. And we're supposed to be doing, various amount of work that maybe now have some free time opened up. And at the same time, we had kind of the climate action plan had this very accelerated timeline to try to get at least a preliminary report ready to give to the new president. So President Barchi wasn't going to commit to any climate change reductions. He kind of kicked off the process with the idea that President Holloway would be the one that would be the decider as to whether, Rutgers decided to adopt something like this. But that still put a very quick timeline of, you start in the fall of 2019 and you're trying to get something on the desk of somebody in January. He came in July, and then we want like a full report kind of given in by the end of this year. So we had a very fast timeline. We had, at the same time, because of COVID, Rutgers all of a sudden saw several, budget cuts, as many of you probably know, or if you're at other universities, everybody saw budget cuts because of COVID, right? So the hiring we had meant to do for helping write this report was not going to be allowed. And so we thought perhaps students could help fill in some of that kind of labor gap. And then we had the students available at that time. I'm trying to see, I can see that somebody put a chat, but I can't see what the chat says.
It's from Kevin Webb, and he linked to an article in The Guardian that says banks lent $2.6 trillion linked to ecosystem and wildlife destruction in 2019. And it's a report on the lack of policies regulating impact on natural world, saying that finance industry effectively bankrolls biodiversity loss.
Okay.
Sounds cool.
All right. Sorry, there's something about having my full screen for the PowerPoint that I can't see chats as they come in.
Rachel, I had
Yes.
that problem all the time too as a faculty. So up on the top, there's a pull down where it'll allow you to view the chat
Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, thank you.
because you're sharing a screen. All right, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No problem. Thank you. And then all of a sudden we had students, a student body that we thought might be interested in, well, we knew they were certainly interested in climate action, and then, maybe they would be interested in doing some research this summer. So we quickly put together, kind of through my time with the Rutgers Energy Institute. And the way we did it was we, outlined some of the work that needed to be done that we thought students could help with. And then Mollie was very, I think, integral. We sent out calls to, okay, yeah, I'll go. So yeah, we put together kind of some ideas about the work that was needed. I went to all the working groups and kind of said like, hey, tasks that you think undergrads can do, send them along to me, write up a description, and we'll kind of get them in an Excel sheet. And from that, we kind of, outlined some activities we thought students could do as far as research activities went. And then, yeah, we sent out that kind of call for research participants, students to participate in research. And we were surprised, because I thought like, oh, maybe this summer I'll run a group of 10 students or something like that. And we just had put up a Google form with this call, and 125 students ended up filling out the Google form and expressed some sort of interest. And, we asked them how many hours they thought they could work, whether they wanted credit, what their major was, what year they were. And so students, were across kind of public policy, engineering, arts and sciences, and School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, where I am. And so we were really happy to have, we thought, well, if nothing else, students will really get to interact with students from other majors around this problem. We kind of in a different approach, right? Because students were like, oh, can you let me know if I've been selected, or things. And we just let everybody in that signed up and expressed interest, and was going to show up. We didn't have a selection process. It was all online because of COVID. There was no in-person research, and we thought this, I think Mollie and I were talking about it the other day, that this was, we felt kind of lowered the barriers as far as kind of an introduction to research goes, right? Because these aren't kind of highly skilled research tasks at this point. Some of the students had certain skills that I matched them with certain projects or certain professors that, they could use more. Mollie, doing work with me, had, done some really great computer programming, helping us pull data out of programs and stuff. But just for students that wanted to get a feel, that were interested in climate action, that wanted to get a feel for research, we thought this was a good way to give them an opportunity to do that. We had a really, Rutgers is very diverse anyway, but we really did have a good diversity of students as far as gender, race, ethnicity, and you saw kind of the range of majors. In the end, about 60 participated fairly consistently, and I would say 25 signed up for credit. And we met kind of once a week, at least at the beginning, on a Zoom call where we talk about the research task for that week, what they did the previous week. As we went on, well, I'll go to the next slide. But there was kind of, so we really kept this fairly unstructured. And I don't know if that worked to our advantage or disadvantage, but we kind of had more structured tasks where I gave very specific instructions weekly, and that was kind of more students were doing that, but I would, they all went through city certification, for example. And so like our first kind of week or two, I do a lot of social science surveys. We were getting ready to do a survey of the Rutgers faculty and student body and staff on kind of asking them questions about, well, getting data that we needed to kind of estimate greenhouse gas emissions out of Rutgers, you know, behavior. So like getting more information on our commuters, and then also asking them, you know, willingness to support various climate policies and things like that. And so we were in the process of writing and pre-testing that survey. So students went through the city certification. So just so they understood, you know, got some exposure to, you know, many of these are engineering students who've never done never done any kind of social science research. So got exposure to the ethics of, you know, surveys and things like that. Then they pre-tested the survey where they, you know, took the survey but could put comments on all the questions and say what was clear and unclear. And the committees, you know, when I fed back this information, they were really impressed with, you know, the level of feedback they got from the students and the amount of feedback, because there were so many students. Normally you can, you know, you get maybe 10 students to take a survey and pre-test it for you. And so, but those are kind of fairly specific tasks that were outlined, and they would write from Joel Harmon asked if there's business students from the business school. There were a couple, but not many. So you can see here, they're down here. I think there was like 3 or 4. So, and that might just be the, you know, kind of a result of how we recruited, or through, you know, who we recruited, which was kind of through the institutes and through more the student connections that Mollie had as far as student clubs and things. The students could choose how many hours they worked. So there would be kind of like, you know, 2 tasks for the students working, you know, 3 to 6 hours. And then there would be more tasks if you were doing more hours, and then more tasks if you're doing more hours. Putting these activities together took a lot of time. And then often I found students were saying like, oh, that wasn't enough hours of work for me. And so it really, the kind of generation of research tasks that can be done on a lone basis was difficult. And then there's less structured. We put students into kind of much more broad, those who were working more hours, where they kind of were given a broad mission or kind of question for, you know, for a working group, and almost left to their own devices, although many of them had kind of faculty liaisons or leaders that they worked with to help kind of figure out how to answer some of those questions for those specific working groups. So here, you know, is some of the examples of the more structured assignments that students got. And then here's the less structured groups. These were kind of, they kind of had paragraphs of, you know, we're going to ask you to look at administrative university travel records, and I gave them the data, and I gave them specific things I wanted them to pull out of it, and that they were a little bit left to their own devices. And Mollie helped set up these Slack working spaces for the projects for the students. And I don't know, Mollie, did they use them a lot?
So that was kind of interesting that I just wanted them to have like a space to collaborate and kind of start the conversation. And so I opened up every channel and sent a message like that one in the fleet decarbonization group. And some people wanted help, and like I met with them, and then they would use the Slack throughout. And some people were like, thanks for offering, we're good. And they just kind of like did their thing and went on their way. So it was kind of like 50-50 with who was using the workspace and who like reached out for help.
Right. Yeah, so that was something that the students kind of, yeah, some used them, like you said, some had other ways that they were going about it, but they were, you know, left to their own devices. And then I'm going to hand this off to Mollie now to talk about some of the ways that students practiced communicating the results of the various activities that they did.
Yeah, so these are a couple slides from some of the final PowerPoints that people developed. So on the right is a slide from the carbon sequestering concrete group. And I love this slide because they got really into the chemistry of like how greenhouse gas emissions are impacted from the creation and the formation and the pouring and settling of concrete. They went really in depth. And I think that was kind of a good example of like the interdisciplinary nature of the research, because they went all the way from like the molecular structure of cement up to like applications in a social way on the university. And on the left is from, I think, the building modeling group, and they went through a bunch of our energy, our electricity, our water usage data. And they found in which databases there were some gaps.
Oh,
and
he just
kind of different parameters that were good to look at in assessing our overall building energy consumption. And what that enabled students to do was get familiar with like real applicable data sets. And then through communicating the results and making these PowerPoints, and then having an emphasis on graphics and on making the information easily understandable, the students were really able to format data in a way you don't really do when you're in a class. And that's what I thought was kind of cool about this, because that kind of like lack of structure that we had enabled students to just kind of think about like what were the important aspects that they found when they were researching and how would they want to present that. So that's what I thought was kind of cool about that. And if you go to the next slide, I think it's an infographic. Yeah, and so here's an infographic that a student named Annie Lee, I believe, made about food and carbon emissions. And so this was one of the tasks that was given to like the majority of students in that kind of unstructured group, because all students are really interested in food waste. It's like a very common thing that everyone wants to know where our food waste is going, and can we get more plant options in the dining hall, and like what's an anaerobic digester. And so Dr. Schwom had an assignment one week to make an infographic all about food. And there was a lot of positive feedback that I heard about that assignment, because when people start realizing that like there are fun ways to display information, and that just the difference between like putting this infographic up versus, you know, just putting a PowerPoint, it's like blank with like a couple of words on it, is like makes a huge difference. People get really excited about that. And so with that, students also got to learn how to use infographic software. I think Rachel proposed a couple example softwares, but also it was like, you know, if you have one you already prefer, you can go ahead and do that. And yeah, like I mentioned before, the kind of like majority of the tasks and having like the bulk of this infographic stuff be concentrated around food waste was specified particularly because students are just like super interested in food waste. And then next slide. So this is actually an example infographic that I made not as a part of this research project, but I wanted to put it in here as an example of like furthering that communication. Because like Rachel said, this was put together very quickly, and there were definitely a lot of areas that I think we would both change if we were to look back. And I think one of those would be making sure that we're getting this like data and this research to the student body. And so I'm Vice President of Students for Environmental Awareness at Rutgers, and I was able to use that connection and that platform that we have to kind of spread data and spread this analysis. And it's really, really cool to see the kind of engagement you can get like a lot of undergraduate students on information that I think traditionally professors and faculty might not think students are interested in. And when the interim plan came out, I think it was like 141 pages long. And it was like not formatted in an easily readable way. There were like no graphics because of all that time constraint. And the task force really just had to put it together. And the group of students in SEA that were like ready to go just immediately started reading it and like summarizing it and putting it in a way that other students could understand. And then we take something like this graphic, which was summarizing actually the pre-plan, and we put it on Instagram, and we reach like 300 students. And it's really, really cool to see people referring back to this time and time again. We have like a timeline of the action plan creation. We have like the preliminary baselines inventory, all the different working groups and ways to get involved. So that's like a really, really exciting thing. Next slide. Did the video disappear?
Oh, there
it is. Could you play it without sound? Is that a possibility? If not, it'd be fine.
Let me see what's gonna happen here. If it just took me to.
If it doesn't play, that's all right. It's just me talking more, so no one needs that. But
okay.
This is a video that was for Climate Action Week, and it is breaking down like Rutgers emissions. So I just took the emissions baseline that we had, and I like made it into this infographic video where it was on Prezi. So, you know, you were just like flying between different screens, like learning super basic stuff about like how we produce electricity, how we buy electricity off the grid, and so on and so forth. And it was really cool to see students like resharing this on their Instagram stories and be like, you know, watch this if you want to see stuff, when it's like, it can be pretty dull information, but it's so important to all of us. And so if we present it in the right way, people really start to understand that it's important. And that's definitely something that I heard a lot of, like talking to students about feedback about this, the research that they did this summer, was that they were able to channel this kind of like super common interest that my generation has in the climate to something like more tangible. And that was really exciting. And next slide. Yeah, so kind of as I've been saying throughout, but the interdisciplinary applications, I think, were some of the coolest things that the students got, because just like in my group alone, I was in the building and energy solutions group. We had like engineers and we had humanities majors, and I'm like an earth science person. And so having all those people coming together, and most of us weren't for credit. I don't know if anyone in my group was doing it for credit, which I think is a really phenomenal thing, that just like people just really want to engage in this. And it just shows that there's like such an initiative for students to do work. I think a big thing that students got out of this was having access to professors and starting to understand that people are there to answer questions. And especially if you think you can be an asset to research, to climate research, to the creation of the climate action plan, then that's something that you're welcome to be included in. I think that's a really special part of being at like a big public research university, that people are, they're always in need of more, more work and more help. And so if you offer that, then you can be a part of a process that you think is really cool. Handling real data, something I mentioned before, that's a huge thing that I personally got out of this. I worked on the asset management system with Rutgers. And so it's this massive system that has a catalog of all of our pipes and our utility fans and our HVAC systems and all of our cars. And it's insane, and it's so big. And it's cool to see that real data, not just because it's fun to have like this real world application where I'm walking around campus and I'm like, I know that that exhaust fan, I know that cooling tower, but also because real data is usually very messy, and there are lots of holes, and there are lots of errors, and there are lots of times where you click something and it takes you to a non-existent page. And so that was also a helpful experience because you have to figure out how to navigate that. And then there's also this integration into the sustainability community. And this is a cool, this was actually a really fun thing that some of the students who were kind of initiated into this sustainability community through this summer research, I now see them on Instagram on Students for Environmental Awareness, like commenting and, you know, getting involved in other ways. And as far as like research goes, whether or not they made like a super concrete contribution to the climate action plan where they will be like co-listed as an author, it no matter what, it did get them involved in this process, and they can like keep moving from there. And then the other thing that a lot of people liked is that it was real work, you know, that it was real tasks that were taken from the interim climate action plan that needed to be done. And we were interested with like some aspect of those. And so that kind of like real impact and having that collaborative environment, I think was really, really good for students.
Yeah, and I think, and as you know, as the due date for the interim report kind of came, and as we're working on things now, I've been pushing out to the various chairs, like they're saying, oh, you know, we don't have this. And I'm like, oh, students did some of the, you know, I'm like, oh, here's a paragraph on, you know, that some of the students wrote, or here, you know, at one point they all looked at carbon calculators for food. And we've got this huge list that students basically crowdsource, you know, they all put one in of, you know, various calculators used for food impacts. And that I've been able to push this out to the various working groups, sometimes in not as polished, I think, condition as they would like. They still got to work with it, but you know, it's generally often a start for them. And Mollie is just an exemplary student in being able to kind of take something and run with it, which, you know, a few, you know, the students have done. And I'm really happy to hear, Mollie, that that you see them now kind of milling in sustainability circles and becoming a little bit more visible and engaged. So that is kind of that. I have some questions for you all, but I thought I would open it up to any questions from folks on the call here. No questions. Oh, this is just like teaching. Well, if there's no questions, I'll just kind of, we have questions for any of you who are educators or students or things.
I have a question, Rachel. So
okay.
what was the debrief like for did you do a debrief of the students? What did they perceive? What did they get out of it? I know that different people at different levels of involvement, engagement, different credit hours. So there's probably some variation. Did you do any kind of debrief with them informally or formally?
You know, I didn't. Mollie talked to various students and kind of that feedback she just presented, but I didn't do any. You know, the truth is everything was so fast tracked and kind of really busy that I didn't kind of do any kind of formal, you know, feedback process. I wish I could have, or I would have liked to kind of, I mean, I really would like to see this go forward in some form, but also I recognize that it probably can't go forward in this kind of form, only because it's way too dependent on me. I mean, it's way too dependent on me doing a ton of work in the summer. Like it's like running a huge class in the summer when I'm supposed to be doing research. But students are, no. So besides the feedback that Mollie got, I guess the answer is I didn't get any official feedback, though I wish I had done something like that.
It does seem fairly burdensome for one person, one faculty member to handle all this. So the next possibilities, are there student groups on campus? Like, environmental action groups and other student groups who are formally chartered groups who might take this on as a project.
And that, Mollie, if you want to speak to that, Mollie is part of Students for Environmental Awareness at Rutgers. And they certainly had involvement in helping us publicize, and Mollie put her own labor into kind of supporting, like she said, students were contacting her for help and kind of she was helping to move things along. I don't know, Mollie, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Students for Environmental Awareness is kind of the hub of student environmental action. And then we also have a sustainability coalition, which is a group of like 30 plus student orgs that are all sustainability related. So we have a very active sustainability presence on campus, but coordinating something like this is not really within the capacity of those groups or like the structure of the groups. And I think that's because the nature of the research is you do need to be closely tied in with professors and having that kind of the consistency and the return of being able to check in with a professor every week or every couple of weeks, to the point where it does become like a class, which is often not what people want when they sign up for like an extracurricular club. And even though a lot of students in Students for Environmental Awareness are really passionate about this kind of research, and when I was reaching out to different co-chairs of the working groups to kind of nudge them to get projects for this summer program, I was bringing up a lot of the research topics that students in Students for Environmental Awareness had been tossing around for months that we all wanted to be researching. Specifically like the carbon capturing concrete. That's been like a pet project and a pet idea of Students for Environmental Awareness for a long time, but we don't have the capacity to like maintain a longer research project, and definitely not to facilitate dozens or almost even 100 students. And I think at other schools who are able to do that and coordinate that kind of like living lab, like Rachael was saying, it's because they have like full-time staff that's dedicated to that, because it really is part of a full-time job. And so having like an office of sustainability where a whole part of their outreach is making sure that this kind of niche of like student research like can be filled and like everyone can be funneled in the right way, because right now we just have like all these individual groups, and without like that kind of central full-time facilitator, I don't really see them coming together. So that might have been kind of long-winded. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, well, it did for me. I mean, I think, yeah, it's kind of the student groups suffer a little bit from the lack of institutionalization of kind of students are coming in and going out all the time. And so we're certainly advocating, or many of us would like to see Rutgers have a sustainability office or something like that, so that many things could be run out of it, including something like a climate action plan that would also have students, things like the Energy Institute or the Climate Institute at Rutgers are also places those may be, but they don't have full-time dedicated staff. So for example, like a month of my time is, for the Energy Institute. And so it's not enough to kind of to do these things. I should mention that other faculty certainly pitched in here, and particularly Zenya Morin and Z's at Todd over at engineering, and worked with and had weekly meetings with a subgroup of students as well. So I think that model of potentially coordinating, but also having faculty not trying to run 60 students, but breaking students up, and faculty running 3 students if you had enough faculty doing that, but then it still have some sort of central coordination or central meeting where students are getting to interact and present what they're doing with their groups, or, you know, get kind of broader research exposure would be ideal.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of idea of having like the faculty person not have to be as engaged as, you know, like running a class, and have like the individual research professors just like assisting as need be, like really can only happen if there's that like one central person.
So I read that Rutgers, your President Holloway, I believe, right? Hasn't he committed to carbon neutrality by 2050? Or am I mistaken?
I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen an official commitment. Haven't particularly, I've been out a little bit dealing with some other things. So, but Mollie, you would have known, or Students for Environmental Awareness would.
I certainly would hope we would have known. Yeah, he definitely hasn't made any public statement. And we also met with him the first month that he came into office and presented him with our kind of like climate priorities, one of which is carbon neutrality by 2050. He didn't say he was not on board. He talked of himself like an ally, and I think he is, but he said he didn't have enough information to commit to a carbon neutrality date, which does make sense. And my hope is that we started him towards asking the task force for more information to kind of get that information that he needs, because it's a really important thing, not just for the climate action plan, but also for the student body to see a carbon neutrality date, to know that this is being taken seriously, and also to kind of follow the structure and the example of so many other universities that are taking climate action.
So the typical process, and I know this because I talked to somebody who worked on the plan at UPenn, and what happens is the board of trustees commits to this goal without a timetable, and then that kicks off a series of activities. And they had a 5-year planning period with a number of working committees. And at the end of 5 years, they were able to present a plan with a timeline. And so that's one process that I know about.
Yeah, and I think Rutgers, you know, I don't know, I don't believe the Board of Trustees has voted on anything. We certainly are under an accelerated timeline in the sense of the working groups are working, but intend to kind of present, you know, actions that could get us. And I think there will be a section kind of at, I'm like, I think Dr. Bob Kopp's writing some of this of, 2030 versus 2050 or whatever the timeline is, and what actions need to fall under those. And I think that whole kind of plan is meant to be done sometime in 2021. So not a 5-year process, but something I think much more abbreviated, because we're already, behind. But I don't know the process for getting it adopted by Rutgers.
Excuse me, this is Gina. In the last week, I'm going to find the email. It just came out that he had met with Kevin Lyons and the heads of the climate task force. And then he released a statement that is quoted here, that it has his unequivocal support as it develops a climate action plan for the university. He is speaking and making closing remarks tomorrow at this conference at 3 o'clock. So I'm going to make sure we find out exactly what that is. I know that he will either speak to it or be asked about it. But I just read that, and they're having all sorts of town hall meetings all over the campus and different campuses about it.
Yeah.
Kevin Lyons is from the business school. He was the co-leader of this.
Right.
Yeah, Holloway's been a real departure from Barchi, and he's been super supportive. And I think it was in a different university-related webinar last week or a couple weeks ago that he also verbally supported fossil fuel divestment, which was really big. And he's always been very clear that he wants student feedback and he wants student involvement. And I think Nolan Fahan, who's another student at Rutgers, just sent that quote that you mentioned, Gina, of the unequivocal support for the climate action plan. So that's really, really encouraging.
Right. I have to say his leadership is very much a step ahead. And he's been incredibly supportive in all sorts of issues that were not so dealt with before.
So that means technically, and I'm glad to hear that there's good forward momentum at Rutgers, but the Board of Regents has yet to put the imprimatur on this plan, I guess.
Not that I know of. Yeah, right.
And so it'll happen hopefully, but that means ironically and very ironically and sadly is that New Jersey is a coastal state, and also means that as far as I know, none of the dozen or so state public institutions have committed to this goal. And being in New Jersey, that is in some ways very disappointing because we will feel the impact of climate change more than many in this state. And I've seen maps of much of Wildwood underwater in the coming decades and so on. I'm sure you've seen the same maps with the projections of what happens with sea level rise. So, but that's where we are.
Yeah.
Well, we're not giving up yet.
Never say die, no.
No.
Yeah, this is a great step forward. I have to say, I'm incredibly impressed with you, Mollie. You're just amazing student, and your energy and articulateness is great. So one of the things I think is really important is that we start crossing more of the silos at Rutgers and get the business school students more involved. So maybe we can follow up on that as an action item.
Yeah, definitely. There's a really great movement with sustainability in business, specifically at Rutgers. We have a club called Rutgers Enactus, and they've always had a sustainability focus, and they just made a whole separate specific like subgroup, Enactus Sustainability. And so it's all business majors focused on sustainability, and they're doing projects right now on supply chain, waste management, and Students for Environmental Awareness has long had a history of only having environmental and biological sciences majors in our organization, but we are up to 3 business majors now. We have someone in dance, so it's branching out. And yeah, definitely we got to get some business people in there, and hopefully Kevin Lyons can help us with that.
I also wanted to make sure you're aware and can join. We're having a student panel at 4:35 this afternoon, talking about the students' view of sustainability, the Sustainable Development Goals, careers, a whole bunch of stuff. So I hope you can join us.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Hi, I came in a little late, but I was wondering if you've talked about the concept of like an Office of Sustainability at Rutgers and how what you guys have done ties into like how that might work and how students could be given opportunities in a similar way in the future.
Hi, Nolan. Yeah, we touched on it briefly in the sense of, I said we're all kind of, or we all, Mollie and I guess is who I can speak for, would hope that one thing that will happen is something like an Office of Sustainability, and that efforts like this really need some staff or faculty designated person that can help really pull students in and then, and pull other faculty in and make those connections, but also give the structure and kind of sustain, the time and resources really needed to make this work for students. For me, this project was really important, or, engaging students in the climate action research was really important because this is such a great opportunity. I mean, you guys are here to get an education, to learn, and that this opportunity to be involved in something that the university, that you're going to, is really important and can be better than any kind of classroom learning, or certainly can at least enhance the classroom learning. And so it was really important to us to make that happen, or at least try to make that happen in various ways. And so, but the kind of sustaining of that is, takes effort. And we certainly would hope that something like an Office of Sustainability could help sustain efforts like this, and you know, the idea that this went online because of COVID, but that it might be something that we would want to do online in the summers, you know, for students for credit or as part of through Students for Environmental Awareness, that to keep students engaged in the summer in kind of campus activities and research when students don't necessarily want to spend their whole summer in New Brunswick or something like that, you know, kind of makes sense, even though, as I think we're all also learning, that running online stuff is just really, really intensive and takes a lot of effort. And so, yeah, I think we hope that an Office of Sustainability will be established at Rutgers, and we hope that it could sustain efforts like this.
If I could just piggyback on that, Katie Parrish had led a major effort to put together a proposal, did an extraordinary job with all the different clubs and everything. She's going to be on the student panel in an hour and a half, and presented it to the top people at Rutgers. Also submitted it for one of our big ideas for $150 million. It made it into the final stages, and so it's still on the shelf, but it hasn't been negated. And I think with the new incoming president, we have a new opportunity to resurrect that. So I'm always the eternal optimist here.
Yeah.
But the proposal, it's not like we have to do it from scratch. The proposal is already written. It was phenomenal, a piece of work by a lot of the students led by Katie. Were you involved in that, Mollie, as well?
I was not involved in that. I don't know if I was at Rutgers at that time or not, but we did speak with Krishna and with Michelle. I don't know if you know them, but they were working with the Sustainability Coalition, and they were involved with the creation of that report. And so it was this past summer when we were kind of handing leadership of the Sustainability Coalition between, you know, Next Generation, that we talked with them about those efforts. And I think where they lost that proposal, which I agree was like a phenomenal piece of work, they had Chancellor Molloy's like complete support, and so I think that they thought they were going to get it done. And then, Nolan, do you remember? Can you help me with this? Was it that Barchi created the climate task force, and then that kind of like became all the climate news that was happening, and maybe like Barchi didn't think he needed to make something else? Do you remember?
Well, that's the way that Krishna put it, because Krishna talked with Molloy, and then he said Molloy was like, well, we were going to do this thing here, and I think it was specifically for New Brunswick Office of Sustainability. And then the task force spanned all the campuses, and so it seemed like it was like on a different level, and yeah, didn't want to step on Barchi's toes with having the task force.
Mm-hmm. So as happy as we were when the task force got created, we were like, ooh, did we just get sidestepped there a little bit just with the office? But
yeah, I think it needs to go to the Senate, which I happen to be on. So we'll see what happens. Thank you. This was awesome.
Well, thank you for the
other
opportunity.
questions.
I was going to say thank you for the opportunity to share with you all, and just, yeah, if you have any questions or ideas or kind of, you know, other institutional connections we should be making or things like that, please let us know, because we're definitely, you know, hoping to be able to keep pushing something like this forward, but I'm sure it will take different forms as we learn.
mm-hmm.
Great job. Thank you so much.